Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day I invite you to learn more about how technology is transforming our life, work, and indeed world, and hopefully bringing us all a little bit closer together. But today, I want to talk about the diversity problem in tech. And I think we've all become accustomed to reading about how we're unwittingly feeding human bias into algorithms and starting to see the impacts of that. And I also read a breathtaking stat today for all the wrong reasons, and that is women make up 11% of the entire cybersecurity global workforce. But when discussing diversity, equity and inclusion, figures like that are just scratching the surface. So today I've invited social entrepreneur and LGBTQ plus advocate Arthur Woods onto the podcast, who's working at the intersection of equity and technology. Now, he's also the author of a nationwide best-selling book, Hiring for Diversity, and most recently co-founded a company called Mathison, which is a venture-backed technological platform equipping employers with all that they need to manage their diversity hiring efforts. And he's also delivered over 300 keynote speeches and is a 3-time TEDx speaker and advised multiple brands throughout his career, including the likes of Disney, Sonos, and many more. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the US, where Arthur Woods is waiting to speak with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you, Neil. Thanks for having me. I'm Arthur Woods. I'm one of the co-founders at a diversity, inclusion, and equity technology company called Mathison. I am an LGBTQ leader and an author of a recent book that we came out with called Hiring for Diversity. And I've been in the tech world really for the last 15 years or so, Neil. So excited to talk about the future of tech and also where diversity, equity, inclusion comes into the mix right now.
And it is such an important topic. For those reasons alone, I'm excited to get you on the podcast today. But before we do, I always like to learn a little bit more about my guests. So how did you get here? What's your origin story? Where did your passion for technology come from? And what was it that put you on this path that you're on right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, Neil. So, I grew up in a rural town in Northern California. I was in a single parent family. When I went to college, I was probably one of the poorest kids in my graduating class. But I found myself in many cases not fitting in college, Neil. But I resorted to entrepreneurship as a way of kind of creating your own rules if you don't follow other people's rules. Yeah. And so for me, I started my first company in college. I sort of got the entrepreneurial bug, and what I discovered really quickly was that there are so many incredible, things that we need to fix and disrupt. And, the nature of being an entrepreneur is kind of, to figure out how you improve something, how you make it better, how you do something that really is transformational. And I was studying business and technology at school. And I found myself applying my studies to my ventures at the time. I ended up at Google for a couple of years, which I think kind of reinforced the tech bug for me, the data focus. And then I launched a company called Imperative years ago that was an HR tech company that is in the peer-to-peer coaching space. And I found myself now in this world of HR technology, where you start to think about the fact that a human being spends the majority of their waking life in their jobs, right? And yet, work is broken for so many people. Work is not a place where people are often thriving. And so I really became fascinated with this idea of how do we use technology to bring out a sense of humanity in our work? How do we use technology to fix inefficiencies in our jobs and create places that people can really be included and empowered in? And that really is what led me to do the work that we now do at Mathison.
So that path led you to Mathison. Can you tell me a bit more about what you do there, the story behind the name? I feel there's got to be a story there, and your mission to transform hiring for diversity with technology.
Yeah. So first of all, we are named Mathison because Alan Turing, who of course
Yes.
folks in the UK know very well, and folks globally probably know. Alan Turing cracked the Enigma code in World War II, and his middle name was Mathison. And similar
Ah,
to the way that Turing, was able to really decode this extremely complex problem, we really see the work in DEI as being a similar need. We need to decode an entirely new solution to shifting behavior in terms of how we more equitably build our organizations. And it is as complex a problem as the Enigma code for many organizations. So that's really our name. And so it's kind of this, it pays homage to Turing, who did this amazing decoding, but also an individual who, despite his enormous impact and achievements, was persecuted at the end of his life because he was gay. So we sort of see our kind of connection with Alan Turing as being on a few fronts.
wow, I absolutely love that. It was such a powerful story as well, and a great tribute. So, what are the biggest problems that you see in most companies now, especially around diversity hiring efforts? Because it is a hot topic. There's a lot of talk about it, probably more talk than less action in a lot of areas, but I'm curious what you're seeing.
Well, what we're seeing, first of all, Neil, is that there has never been a more urgent time for improving diversity, equity, inclusion than today, right? Yeah. This has gone from an elective to an essential body of effort for most organizations. And yet, even in the last 2 years, when this really has risen to such priority, most organizations have not made a lot of progress, right? So we're in this really interesting time where there's a lot of intent. A lot of organizations are struggling to make impact. There's a real need to start making measurable progress. And organizations, in many cases, don't even know where to start. So for us, our innovation was to say, well, look, listen, your diversity, equity, inclusion efforts are probably not going to be about doing one or two things differently, or implementing one individual tool, or changing one person's role. In order to really increase the diversity of our workforce and to really shift the culture of our workforce, we need a holistic strategy, and we need end-to-end tools and technology that really get us there. And so this is really where we've pioneered what we consider to be this holistic platform. We call it an end-to-end technology solution that is all about centralizing the different components of what will propel an organization's diversity strategy. And what's really kind of powerful about the way that we are trying to focus on this is our entire model is rooted in measurement. So before an organization gets to tactics, I need to source candidates from a new community, or I need to go, sort of train people in a certain area. It's all about getting a baseline understanding of where is your organization today? What do you need to change? How does your organization's current setup map to what other organizations like you are doing? And again, this is all about the decoding piece, Neil, right? Organizations don't know where to start. So until they can get a real kind of comprehensive understanding of where they are today, they're kind of driving blind. So we've created this really interesting measurement system. We call it our equity index, that gives organizations transparency into their most pressing gaps and needs. And what's really neat about the approach is it's giving organizations a really interesting roadmap as to where they need to focus.
And I would say, thankfully, most businesses are finally waking up to the fact that they've got to be as diverse as their audience if they're going to effectively serve them. If not, how can they serve them? So for any business leader that's listening now, what could they be doing differently to reimagine their approach to unconscious bias in their organisation? And also the index system you were talking about there. Could you tell me a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so a few things there. One is that leaders have to fundamentally start by considering if we're interested in increasing the diversity of our workforce, right? Yeah. And we have a group of underrepresented communities that we're trying to recruit and bring into our organizations. We need to start by fundamentally understanding, how do we reframe the fact that individuals from underrepresented communities have not been afforded the same opportunities as we might have. They might not show up with the same credentials or experience. They might have all the right skills and aptitude to be successful, but their profiles might not show up in the same way. And if we start to really sort of reimagine how an unconventional profile really appears in our workforce, we start to now rethink everything from how we scope the requirements for a job, all the way to how we reframe the initial way that we interview someone and engage their progress, all the way to the way that we maybe create a more inclusive and safe and accessible environment for people when we're bringing them into the hiring process. So our big motion has been to help a leader fundamentally reframe the problem itself, help a leader sort of gain greater empathy for job seekers from a cross section of communities, so that when they're bringing them in and engaging them in this whole new way, they are able to have a whole different mindset with which they're approaching this whole decision-making process.
And what we're talking about here is an incredible human problem, and something that affects society and communities all over the world where people are listening to our conversations today. And what really stood out for me, and one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast, is how you're tackling it with technology. So for people hearing about you for the first time, can you offer a bit of an overview of what LGBTQ plus technology is, and also how it's impacting our society, culture and future for the right thing? Because I think it's that fusion between the issue and technology that's really inspiring.
Absolutely. So, I mean, for folks that are new to this category, or, still sort of learning what it all means, I would say, to date, just as we have, leveraged technology to process things like payroll, just as we've leveraged technology to process, things like our hiring process, our talent acquisition process, all the way to our sales systems, right? These are all considered to be essential technologies that basically power our activities in a certain category. We have not created the system that powers our diversity, equity, inclusion efforts. And if we really do consider them to be as essential and not as elective as they once were, we have to have technology that actually facilitates the activities we really need in this area. And no one has really delivered that. So that's really our vision, is that we are able to create an end-to-end system that makes the DEI efforts that we're really all leading with as essential and as accessible and as widespread and as scalable as these other essential activities that govern our organizations, right? That's really what we're talking about here.
We've talked a little about Mathison's Equal Hiring Index and the scoring system there, but can you tell me a bit more about how it all works, if we take a look under the hood, and how it works and why you feel it's so groundbreaking?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, this all really starts, Neil, with, we can't manage what we can't measure, right? Yeah. And a lot of organizations jump straight to tactics of what they need to do differently. And they struggle with essentially, where do I start? Where are my gaps? How do I read, if we have a drop off of candidates at a certain stage, or if we have a policy that's not in place, is that normal for an organization like us, right? So our equity index is the very first measurement system that enables an employer to gain real comprehensive perspective on the state of DEI across their organization. So think of it as a heat map assessment that an organization can use to basically lift up the hood and better understand where they have gaps. It's almost like a diagnostic, like you would get a diagnostic on your car, or like you would get a physical, for your body, right? This is essentially a diagnostic or a physical for an organization in terms of their DEI efforts. And instead of making this kind of measurement a one-time only exercise, what we do is we give organizations the ability to monitor these activities in a continuous fashion. So, that really sort of changes the entire model for the way that an organization not only sets goals, but also tracks progress and really makes changes, right?
Absolutely. And we've had a look under the hood at how the tech works, but just to bring everything to life that we're talking about here today, I'm curious, do you have any examples, client stories, etc., of the kind of difference that Mathison and your technology has made made a real difference inside an organization? Do you get to hear any stories like that of the kind of difference that it's made?
We really do, and that to me is probably the greatest part of this job, is we get to see organizations that are making real tremendous progress in this effort, right? And in a few cases, I mean, we look at groups like HelloFresh, right, the food company that has basically created their entire DEI strategy, and we've been able to work in partnership together on it, from what they measure all the way to sort of how they expand their pipeline and how they really engage their whole team in efforts. And we look at groups like Sonos. It's so exciting. Sonos, the electric company, the sound company, has not only taken some of the framework and said, we're going to change the way that we hire and the way that we structure our talent systems, but they've applied it to the way that they're even recruiting for their testers, the diversity of their testing group, so that they're creating more accessible, systems, right? They're bringing diversity into the way that they're actually starting to design products, and that is so exciting, right? So this is really a moment where, we get to hear these incredible stories of organizations that are breaking the mold on this work. They're approaching it in a very holistic way. It's not just about their hiring. It's not just about their talent systems. It's really about everything that they do. And we're partnered in that holistic strategy. And I think it's yielding pretty extraordinary results, but it's also yielding an entirely new way of thinking.
So from all the information that you've collated with conversations with companies, working closely with them and monitoring the trends, are there any big trends that you've uncovered, and especially around the greatest gaps employers are facing in diversity hiring? Are there a few things that really stand out? Yeah,
Neil. So there are a few. There's one is very much that so much comes down to how we fundamentally define diversity. Yeah. And a lot of organizations continue to have a very myopic view of what diversity itself is and what it means to be underrepresented. So there's a huge piece around developing a more holistic understanding of diversity itself, and how to essentially look at the cross section of different communities that you could possibly recruit from. Right. I think the second is this whole idea that what we put into our role requirements, what we set into the very bar that we establish for each of the jobs that we hire for has everything to do with how wide of a net we can cast, and to the extent to which we can have underrepresented job seekers part of our model, right? So basically, basically what we really look to do is help an organization limit their requirements to only what's most essential, so they can cast a significantly wider net. An example of that is, a job seeker who, doesn't come in with the same degree experience, or doesn't come in with the same, core experience with a particular job, may have all the right skills and experience, but might not show up with the same credentials. And in many cases, we've systemically created barriers for those job seekers to even enter our process or be considered because they just don't show up with the same profile. So, we really try to focus heavily there. The second thing I would just mention is that so much bias shows up in the interview process, because we end up putting so much emphasis on interviews, but many times they're unstructured and they're inconsistent. So the two areas where there's a ton of opportunity really to move the dial is centered around how we rethink how we scope requirements, and then how we build more structure and consistency in interviews.
And before we were talking, before we started recording the podcast today, we were talking about the state of the world right now, and we don't want to have the news on, and there's so much negativity everywhere. From the work that you're doing here and the change that you're seeing, what makes you hopeful about the future?
Great question. So, I'm most excited about the future in that organizations are really committed to this work right now. And they are, I think they're interested in creative ways to move the dial on the work. And so we see this just, appetite and real investment from leaders. I think that's one piece. The second is that we're not doing this work in silos. What one company and organization is doing well, absolutely can be done by another organization, right? This work is not proprietary. It does not need to be siloed as it has been in the past. And so this idea that there's a real communal effort around the work and we can do it together, to me, makes it all the more sustainable and interesting. The last thing that I would just mention is that we're breaking ground on a lot of exciting new research. And we're barely, honestly, Neil, we're barely scratching the surface of what this work will resemble in 10 years. I tell this to leaders all the time. Any leader who says they're an expert in diversity and inclusion should expect to be completely, sort of transformed in the next 10 years in terms of what the space resembles, what it looks like, what it means to be an expert. So even though we wrote a book on the subject, even though we spend every waking minute thinking about it, we don't consider ourselves experts. We think, we're permanent students in the work. We think, whoever sort of believes they need to reach a state of expertise is likely going to have a long way to go to ever get there, just given the nature of how much the work is changing.
Couldn't agree with you more. And such an inspirational work that you're doing here. And I always like to leave the guests on a note of inspiration too. So I'm going to ask you to go one step further now, because I always ask my guests to leave listeners with a personal touch of inspiration by sharing maybe a book that has inspired them, or maybe a go-to song that they need to get in their head in the zone, or important to them if they're just going to deliver a keynote or something like that. What you're going to leave us with today, and is there a story to accompany your choice too?
Yeah. So what I'd leave you with is, first of all, every single person plays a role. Every single person in our effort is part of this movement. And I'll give you one story, and that is, there was a job seeker who was basically, applied to a job, and one of the leaders basically looked at their LinkedIn profile and said, they're not diverse. We're going to pass on them. We need a diverse candidate, quote unquote. And later on, an individual contributor, not even a recruiter or a leader, had a conversation with this candidate and heard their story and learned that they were a member of the transgender community. They were a military veteran. They had rich diversity of experience and thought. And in hearing their story, they were able to surface this candidate's story to the broader team, and the candidate was back in the process. And it really went to show that every single person in connecting with the community, in taking the time to lead with empathy, to hear people's stories, plays a vital role. And that's really why we need everyone. We need everyone to be part of this effort together. We need everyone to be part of the solution. And everyone's perspective and participation is essential,
It really is. And what an amazing story. And for anyone listening that wants to find out more information about anything we talked about today, they want to find out more about your work, contact your team, or check out the book that you mentioned as well. Where's the best way to find out all this information and reach your team?
Yeah. So the best way to learn about us is you can learn about us at mathison.io, mathison.io. And that's where you can learn about our DEI growth technology and how we're basically, delivering a whole new kind of system for managing your DEI efforts. And then if you'd like to learn about our book, which is called Hiring for Diversity, you can learn about that at hiringfordiversity.com. You can get a copy. We have an exciting pay equity summit coming up on April 12th. Many cool events to really build community around this work together.
Awesome. And where's that event? Is that going to be in Miami too?
It is going to be a virtual event, a virtual summit on pay equity. So we are absolutely always excited to invite people in virtually if they can't be there with us in person.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. We will have business leaders listening all over the world, and I hope your words are going to resonate with them and empower them to make positive change. And I hope they reach out and contact you guys. And more than anything, I think it's the way that you're using technology to impact and make changes across society, culture, and our future and everything. Inspirational work, my friend. I wish you the best of luck for the future. There's an open invite for you to come back on and keep us updated with how things are progressing in the future too. But more than anything, thank you for sharing your story with everyone today.
Thank you so much, Neil. I appreciate you having me.
The theme of this podcast is that technology works best when it brings people together. And in a world where businesses say they want a more diverse workplace and know that diversity of thought is critical to their business, I love how they're turning to technology like Mathison to mobilise their team to actually make it happen. And also how Mathison is using technology to help businesses uncover biases, shift systems, and ultimately change behaviours and have it all in one place. And what a great story behind the name of the company too. But over to you. I want to throw this one out to everybody listening. What resonated with you from today's conversation? Do you have a story that you would like to share? Email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. Keep your questions, experience and insights coming in, and I'll return again tomorrow with another guest. So thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.